All right, so picture this. You're relaxing in a nice hot bath, or maybe you're up to your elbows in soapy dishwater, and you glance down at your hands.
And what do you see?
Wrinkles. It's like my fingers suddenly transformed into tiny little prunes. I'm sure everyone listening has experienced this at some point.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those universal everyday things that we tend to just take for granted.
But have you ever stopped to wonder why it happens?
For years I just assumed it was as simple as water soaking into my skin, making it swell up like a sponge.
Right. That's kind of the classic explanation you hear.
But as it turns out, modern science has a much more interesting story to tell.
And get this, the real reason behind those wrinkly fingers is actually pretty clever. It's all about grip.
That's right. It's not just a passive effect of water absorption. It's an active response by your body, orchestrated by your nervous system, believe it or not.
My body is actually choosing to make my fingers all wrinkly. But, okay, why? What possible advantage could there be to having fingers that look like, well, prunes?
The leading theory, and it's a pretty compelling one, is that those wrinkles actually help you grip things better when they're wet.
So, like, evolutionary speaking, this would have been a useful trait for our ancestors.
Exactly. Think about trying to hold on to something slippery when it's wet. It's much harder, right? Now, picture the grooves on a car tire. Those treads, as they're called, help to channel water away from the tire's contact patch. That gives the tire more traction on a wet road, which helps you, the driver, maintain control.
Right, so basically those wrinkles on our fingers are like built-in tire tread.
You got it. Scientists believe that those wrinkles create tiny channels that allow water to escape from the surface of your skin, and that gives you a much better hold on wet or slippery objects.
That's so cool. Has this actually been tested, though? Like, is there proof that wrinkly fingers really do give you a better grip?
There is. Researchers have actually done experiments where they compared how well people could handle wet objects with wrinkled fingers versus when their fingers were dry and smooth.
Oh, tell me more.
They had people pick up and move various wet items, like marbles, for instance, or fishing weights. And guess what? The results were clear. People were significantly faster and more dexterous when their fingers were wrinkly. They had much better control.
That is amazing. And it makes you think about all the ways this would have benefited our ancestors.
Mhm.
I mean, imagine early humans trying to survive out in the wild.
It's a game changer, right? Gathering food alone would present all sorts of challenges in wet environments. Think slippery fish in a stream or shellfish clinging to wet rocks.
Or even just trying to climb a tree or a rocky surface when it's been raining.
Exactly. That enhanced grip from wrinkly fingers would have been a huge asset. It could have even meant the difference between finding food and going hungry.
So those prune-like fingers weren't just a funny side effect of being in the water. They might have actually been crucial for survival.
Wow. Okay, but how does my body actually do that? You mentioned the nervous system earlier. What's going on under the surface? Right. So it all comes down to this amazing network of nerves in your body called the autonomic nervous system. This is the same system that controls all those things your body does without you even thinking about them.
Like breathing in your heartbeat.
Precisely.
Uh,
Now, when your fingers are submerged in water for a while, special sensors in your skin pick up on this change. They detect that prolonged wetness and send signals to your brain.
and then?
Then, your brain sends signals back through your nerves to the tiny blood vessels in your fingertips. These signals tell those blood vessels to constrict, meaning they squeeze tighter and become narrower.
Wait, so if my blood vessels are constricting, wouldn't that make my fingers thinner, not wrinkly?
That's a great question. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But here's the key. When those blood vessels constrict, it actually reduces the overall volume of the soft tissue beneath the skin in your fingertips.
Ah, okay. I'm starting to see where this is going.
Your outer layer of skin, the epidermis, stays the same size. But because that underlying tissue has shrunk a bit, it sort of pulls the epidermis inward.
Creating those folds and wrinkles that we see. It's almost like a
A deflated balloon. The air is let out and surface gets all bunched up.
perfect analogy. That's the complete opposite of what I always thought.
Sure.
I figured my skin was swelling up with water,
Yeah.
but it's really shrinking a tiny bit underneath, and that's what causes the wrinkles.
Exactly. And here's another interesting point. You really only see this wrinkling effect on your fingers and toes, right?
Hmm.
Not on other parts of your body.
True. It's not like my elbows get all wrinkly when I'm washing dishes.
Right. And that specificity is another clue that supports this grip enhancement theory. It happens in those areas with thick, hairless skin, like your fingers and toes. The areas that are most likely to be handling things, especially in wet conditions.
So it's not just a random quirk. It's a targeted adaptation.
Exactly. It's your body's way of giving you that extra edge when you need it most.
Okay, so in most cases, getting wrinkly fingers in water is a sign that my nervous system is working properly, right?
Exactly. It's a completely normal and healthy response.
But you also mentioned some possible health implications.
Right. In very rare cases, if someone's fingers never wrinkle, even after being submerged in water for a significant period of time, it could potentially point to an issue with nerve function.
Oh, interesting. So, like, their nerves aren't sending those signals to constrict the blood vessels.
Potentially. It could be due to nerve damage or possibly some underlying health conditions that affect the autonomic nervous system.
So, if I notice my fingers aren't wrinkling up after a long bath, should I be worried?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't panic right away. Like I said, it's extremely rare.
But it wouldn't hurt to mention it to your doctor,
Right.
just in case.
Exactly. It's more of a subtle clue that might warrant further investigation rather than a definitive sign of a problem. But it's always better to err on the side of caution and get things checked out if you're concerned.
Good advice. Now, before we wrap up, I'm curious about those fun facts you mentioned earlier. You know I love a good science trivia tidbit.
Of course. Well, here's one you might have noticed yourself. That wrinkling doesn't happen instantly.
Yeah, it takes a few minutes, right?
Right, usually around 5 minutes of being in the water before you start seeing those wrinkles develop.
Okay, makes sense. What about how long it lasts? My fingers seem to go back to normal pretty quickly once I dry them off.
They do. It typically takes about 10 to 15 minutes for the wrinkling to disappear completely once you're out of the water. As your blood vessels return to their normal size, your skin smooths out again.
That's faster than I would guessed. Anything else? Any other surprises about wrinkly fingers?
Well, this might surprise you. We're not the only species who experience this phenomenon.
Ah,
Studies have shown that other primates, like macaques, also get wrinkly fingers and toes when they're in water.
really? So it's not just a weird human thing.
Nope. And the fact that other primates share this trait suggests that this adaptation probably evolved a very long time ago.
Yeah.
It likely serves a similar purpose for them, helping them navigate their wet environments.
Fascinating. Okay, before we move on, are there any other ideas about why our fingers and toes do this? Maybe some less certain theories, but still interesting.
There is one that's a bit more speculative but worth considering. Some scientists have suggested that wrinkly toes might have provided ancient humans with better traction when walking on slippery surfaces.
Ah, so the same principle as the grip for our hands, but for our feet.
Precisely. It could have helped them avoid slipping in mud or on wet rocks, giving them more stability and control in those environments. Now, the evidence for this isn't as strong as it is for the hand grip theory, but it's an intriguing possibility.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Built-in treads for our feet, too. Love it. All right, so to sum up all this awesome info for our listeners, what's the main takeaway from our deep dive today?
The key point to remember is this. Those wrinkly fingers you get after a bath or doing the dishes, they're probably not just a random effect of water. They're likely the result of a very sophisticated, actively controlled system in your body.
It's like a built-in grip enhancement system.
Precisely. It evolved over time to help us handle objects better in wet conditions, which would have been a real advantage for our ancestors.
So next time I'm washing dishes and my fingers start to look like raisins, I'll just think,